Hey y'all, it's Gina, and it is June 25th, 2022, and Roe versus Wade was just overturned yesterday. So I'd been working on a project where I was gathering stories of people's abortion testimonies in an effort to try to bring some community to the stat that we all have heard, which is that 1 in 4 women will have an abortion in their lifetime. So my goal was to kind of humanize that number. And when I put out the call for abortion stories, so many of you guys came forward and were willing to share in this space with me, and I'm honored and floored by that. So I want to start off by saying thank you to the people who shared with me. That is sacred space. And I so appreciate the opportunity to get to hear your stories and to share them with others. Second, I wanted to just remind all of us, myself included, that we don't stop fighting now. We come up with a battle plan, we show up, we're loud, and we demand our basic human rights. It is early morning right now, and everything is quiet. But I am filled with rage and an overwhelming sadness. And I'm tired. I think we're all probably tired. But we're going to keep showing up, and we're going to be there for each other. We can tag each other in if we need to, but we're going to keep showing up. So, in light of that, I thought that this would be a good time to drop these stories that I have been reading and working on. And I wanted to give a shout out to my friend Mary Ellen, who helped me read these. And I also wanted to keep the call out there. I know there's some folks who wrote in and said, I really want to be part of this project, but it's really hard for me to talk about my story because of all the stigma around abortion and because of the trauma that comes with the way that we're treated. So if you want to write in your story, there's going to be a part 2. There are so many stories out there, y'all, and they all deserve to be shared. So please send them in. You can send them straight to me if you want. You can find me on Instagram at Margina_May, or you can send them to the podcast at Fire on the Mountain Pod, whatever you're comfortable doing. So without further ado, don't let the bastards grind you down. Stay strong. Keep in the fight. Remember that our ancestors walked here before us, and we have their power, and that we have each other.
I was 17. Tom and I were very in love. Young love. We found out I was pregnant a few weeks before my 18th birthday. I'd been sick, so went to the doctor and they did a pregnancy test and it came back positive. They immediately tried to prescribe me prenatal vitamins and all that stuff, but never actually talked to me, a 17-year-old child, about my options. Just assumed I'd be a mom. Tom and I told nobody. We went to work out what to do, just the two of us. We toyed with the idea of keeping the baby. It was easy to romanticize parenthood as a couple of kids. But ultimately, we knew we were not ready to be parents, so agreed to have an abortion. Tom was actually the one who scheduled the appointment. We had to wait until I turned 18 because we didn't want to involve our parents. Thankfully, the timing worked out so that I turned 18 before I was past the legal natal length limit to have a legal abortion. Tom and I played hooky from school one day and drove up to Asheville for the procedure. Tom wasn't allowed in with me because he wasn't 18, so he stayed outside the clinic and spent the entire time heckling the protesters there, which should surprise no one. The procedure itself felt like any other medical procedure. They asked me if I knew what I was consenting to, read me my patient rights, and then conducted the abortion. The provider talked me through everything that was happening, what I'd feel, what she was doing, etc. I'm forever grateful that I had my abortion at a time when North Carolina didn't have the, quote, heartbeat law, where they will make you listen to the heartbeat of the fetus in the abortion clinic in the hopes that you'll change your mind about the procedure. So I didn't have to do that. Fucking Republicans. Anyway, afterwards, Tom and I went to Olive Garden, LMAO, on Tunnel Road, and we ate, and I cried tears of relief. And he comforted me, and we toasted to the best decision that either of us had ever made. It's still the best decision I ever made. I never wanted to be a mom. I wasn't fit as a 17-year-old to be a mom. I had my whole life ahead of me. I went to Clemson as a freshman a few months after the abortion and started college like any child should have the opportunity to do. I have never once regretted it, and I know Tom hasn't either. He and his wife just had their first baby together, on purpose and on their own terms. That child will be loved. He will know love and peace and a healthy family. Mine and Tom's never would have. We are both so much better and happier and healthier and more stable, and you fucking name it, because we had a choice. I had the choice to do what was the best for me and my body and my life. Best decision I ever made. Pro-choice for fucking ever.
Let me start by telling you that I was raised in a very strict Southern Baptist home and attended a very strict Southern Baptist school from 5th to 12th grade. A school where boys and girls weren't even allowed to sit next to each other. We were taught only abstinence until marriage. I was 12 years old when my parents took my 18-year-old sister to the ER with stomach pains. I'll never forget the doctor coming into the waiting room announcing that she was in labor. She went her entire pregnancy alone, never telling anyone until the day my nephew was born. I'm not even sure she talked about it then. My dad left the hospital before she gave birth, telling my mom that my sister could come home, but he wanted nothing to do with, quote, that kid. Fast forward a few years, I was 16. I went to church with my best childhood girlfriend and met my first true love. Ooh, I gotta think of a name for him. Billy. We were young, naive teenagers, totally smitten with each other. We were raised very much the same, being taught nothing about the consequences of sex or how to protect ourselves. Because, teaching us would somehow be giving us permission, so it was best to just pretend it wouldn't happen. It wasn't long before we were having unprotected sex. About 6 months into our relationship, I found out I was pregnant. 2 weeks after Billy became smitten with someone else and had moved on. When I called to give him the big news, he asked me what the abortion would cost and told me to come by to pick up the money. I pulled into his driveway. He walked up to the car, handed me what turned out to be half of the money through the window, turned around and walked away. I was heartbroken by the way he treated me. I was embarrassed and ashamed, but had absolutely no doubt that I was making the right decision. I had the abortion a few weeks later, having to sneak into the clinic through the back door to avoid protesters. I called Billy later that day to let him know it was done. We didn't speak again for 25 years. He friend requested me on Facebook in 2010. I accepted it. It's kind of funny. Not hardly a day goes by that I don't think about it. But typical of the other side of this scenario, I had to remind him of it all. He apologized for the way he treated me, but made sure I knew how much he doesn't agree with it. I wish things would have been different. I wish I would have been smarter. I wish I would have been taught about sex. I'm thankful that I made the choice and didn't bring an unwanted child into the world, having to share that child with a father who I've since found out is a drug addict, cheater, and a registered sex offender. Now, almost 40 years later, it was the only choice for me. It was my choice, and it was the right choice, and I'm thankful that I had that choice to make.
When I was in my late 20s, I met a guy that I fell in love with very quickly, as a lot of us do in our late 20s. He made me feel like the most beautiful, most interesting person in the room, no matter where we were or who we were with. We would talk for hours about music and art and science and politics and all the things you passionately talk about when you are falling in love. Our dreams, our crazy lives, our old friends and good times, all the places we wanted to travel to and things we wanted to experience. We never ran out of things to talk about. He had made me absolutely infatuated with him and the way he treated me. And for a while, it felt real. It felt right. It felt like he was the only one I could ever dream of being with. We moved in together, made big plans to move out of state and start our new lives, a grand adventure into our forever together. That is around when little disagreements seemed to be little more than little. Things would escalate in ways I knew weren't right. He started with name-calling, taunting, little pokes at my self-esteem that grew into possessiveness, emotional abuse, and eventually physical abuse. By the time we had moved out of state to a house without close neighbors who could hear him, there were more nights than I'd like to admit that I had to lock myself in the bathroom to get away from him. He would punch holes in the door and the wall while he yelled at me from the other side. I started planning my exit from the relationship. Everything I had was either in his name, shared with him, or ours. I couldn't just run. I'd have nothing. People always say, "Why didn't you just leave him?" It's not that easy. That's when I found out I was pregnant. When I looked down at the positive test, my heart sunk into my stomach, and I sunk down to the bathroom floor and instantly started uncontrollably crying. How could this happen? I was on birth control. We rarely had sex anymore. How could this happen? I was sitting with my back against the tub and my knees near my chest, and I looked at the bruises and scrapes on my right knee, and I thought to myself, I can't do this. I have to escape this, all of this. I knew that I needed to have an abortion. I was not too young to have a child. I was not too poor to have a child. I was not too sick to have a child. I was not a drug addict. I was not homeless. I was not raped. I was terrified. I was terrified, and I was living with a man who physically and emotionally abused me. And I did not want to have that man's child. Now it has been years since I had the abortion, years since I got away from that man. I am grateful that I had the strength to make that decision when I was one of the weakest versions of myself. I am grateful that a safe, legal, and informed abortion was available to me. The other events of that chapter in my life will take more time to get over. I have PTSD. I live with constant anxiety. I have permanent physical damage from him. But I'm still working on healing, working on getting all of myself back, being in control of my own body. What happens to my body is the most important part of that process.
I was 15. He was 2. The choices we made with our 15-year-old minds, hearts, and bodies were my first true adult choices. These were powerful choices which set me on a lifelong journey of healing, directed my career path, and led me to motherhood. I hear a lot of imaginary storylines of why abortion is chosen, and assumptive characteristics ascribed to the person choosing. This powerful choice is a personal one, based on history, beliefs, mindsets, and community. I can only speak to my own personal process and share my unique mindset and experience in the hopes that my story dispels these overgeneralized narratives. Upon finding out I was pregnant as a sophomore in high school, I recall being stricken, frozen, and suddenly feeling very alone. My family was a close but fragile system. 8 years prior, my family had lost a child to an accident. Despite our love and strength, grief was a pervasive presence in our home. Sex had already proved to be an arena where my parents were highly reactive, and one where there felt like no room to be in communication with either my mother or father. A few months back, my mother caught me and my boyfriend alone together. White-knuckled and with a voice filled with rage and fear, she asked me if I wanted to get on the pill. No, I immediately spouted, reassuring her that she had the wrong idea, desperately wanting her to look at me as a young girl who she was proud of, rather than the expression of disgust, dread, and disconnect which arose with this question. Fast forward to me, 15, stricken and pregnant. I wielded my 15-year-old logic and heart to the best of my ability. I had chosen to have unprotected sex, I had said no to birth control, and I couldn't fathom my family being shaken up by these choices. Further, I didn't trust that my parents' marriage and the psyches of my older brother and younger sister could withstand another disturbance in the form of this pregnancy. I made the choices, and I should hold all the fallout. Not every person facing this choice considers abortion as taking a life. I believed that for myself then and still have that subjective belief for myself. As I have grown older and have a child and experienced miscarriages, I have grieved each loss, celebrated my beautiful kiddo, and accepted that conception is not a promise of a living child, but for me, the interaction with another soul. At 15, I grappled with this, alone or with my young boyfriend. I dreamed of the soul, spoke to it, sunk into massive pools of grief and guilt and pain. And as I struggled and suffered, my choice was always the same. I was not ready to be a mother. And I was committed to protecting my family from being disrupted. It is hard for me to name this, but I was in a place where if I couldn't manage to procure an abortion, that I would kill myself. Never before or after this time, in my life at school, sports, Girl Scouts, church, or with friends, have I ever truly contemplated suicide. At 15, frozen and pregnant, suicide felt the only other viable option, should abortion prove impossible, to take some measure of responsibility for my choices. I don't share this as a truth, but rather that it was my truth at this time. So my boyfriend and I plotted, planned, and devised a strategy to get an abortion. It wasn't easy nor quick. We told only his mother, no friends, no other family, no mentors. I think of this time as profoundly lonely. The effects of cutting myself off from my family and friends were deep and lasting. A year later, when reading Demian by Hermann Hesse, a gift of a book that helped me feel less alone, I resonated with the character Sinclair being cast out of the circle of gold and light that surrounded parents, siblings, classmates, and living in the world of secrets and shadows. My 15-year-old self believed I no longer belonged to this world of order and peace and honor, and that I was somehow bad or broken. Still in my 40s, this feeling is part of my struggle with feeling fundamentally good and worthy, and a profound guide in my work in healing. On the day of my abortion, I walked past picketers alone, having let my boyfriend know he didn't have to bother coming in. I know. Somehow it felt more accountable to go in alone. I carried my book, a signed copy of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. She's still the same person too. It's really sweet. As I sat with the other solemn women in a threadbare waiting room, I read, holding tightly to Maya Angelou's courageous voice as she described her own shame, suffering, and spirit. It was a lifeline to humanity that was with me as every other human connection felt severed. I hope that as part of my life's work, I can write a novel that will be a support to another person who feels cast into the shadows. That day, in my fog, upon leaving alone, I left that signed copy, addressed to my grandfather, in the shabby waiting room. I pray it found another soul in need of its nurturance. It had already given me enough. Whew, okay. I know, like what a strong-ass 15-year-old. Yeah. Since that day, I have held many hands as friends faced unexpected pregnancies and made the choices that were right for them. I drove friends from this time period, the same friends who I never told because they swore they could never have an abortion, to their procedures to terminate their pregnancies. I have met other humans in a variety of experiences where they felt cast out of the circle of light of human goodness and tried to reflect their untouchable light and to be with them in times of darkness. Many times I have shared my story with other humans and in circles of mothers. I share how this experience awoke the commitment to become a mother, and how both my boyfriend at the time and myself are now loving parents and deeply committed to our children and communities. I marvel at how many mothers and loving humans have made that same choice, often feeling as alone as I. I am clear that having an abortion was the right choice for me to become a deeply present and loving mother. It was also the loneliest time of my life, and an experience that has given me treasured perspective and evoked deep suffering. I long for a time where the experience of unwanted pregnancy can be accepted as part of our humanity, and those who carry the pregnancy and make their choices are not asked to hold this important human experience alone.
Wouldn't it be nice if we had an amendment to give civil rights to women? To once and for all just really lay it down from the point of view of women. I know what you're thinking, that's just redundant. Chicks got it good now, they can almost be president. But it's worker against worker, time and time again, 'cause the rich use certain issues as a tool. When I say we need the ERA, it ain't 'cause I'm a fool. It's 'cause without it nobody can get away with anything cool. You don't have to go far, like just over to Canada, to feel a heightened sense of live and let live. What is it about Americans, like so many pit bulls trained to attack